They saw her alone on the road at dawn. What she was carrying changed everything. Nobody stops under the Route 9 overpass. That's just a fact about that particular stretch of road, 3 miles east of Denton, Kansas, where the highway lifts itself over a dry creek bed and a gravel shoulder that the county maintenance crew visits twice a year and forgets about in between. There's nothing there. There's never anything there. Which is why, when Ray Cortez's headlights swept the shoulder at 6:40 in the morning and caught the shape of something that wasn't gravel, his hand was on the brake before his brain had finished processing what his eyes had seen. He was the lead rider. He was always the lead rider, not because anyone had voted on it, but because Ray had been riding for 22 years and had developed the particular instinct of a man who reads road the way other people read text. He saw things first. He reacted first. The 7 riders behind him had learned, over the years, that when Ray's brake light came on for no obvious reason, you trusted it. They all stopped. The shape on the gravel shoulder was a woman. She was small, the way certain older women are small, not frail exactly, but compacted, as if decades of living had distilled her down to what was essential. She was wearing a heavy coat over a wool sweater, a scarf knotted at her neck, boots that were good for walking. One hand clutched a cloth shopping bag. The other was pressed flat against the gravel, trying to push herself up. Not succeeding. Ray had his helmet off before he'd finished telling himself to take it off. He was on the gravel beside her in 3 seconds. "Ma'am." He kept his voice level. Not loud, not alarmed. The voice of someone who has decided the situation is manageable and intends for the person in front of them to believe that too. "Ma'am, I'm here. Can you hear me?" Her eyes were open, blue-gray, sharp, and looking at him with the specific expression of someone who is in significant pain and is refusing to let it be the loudest thing in the room. "I hear you," she said. Her voice was clear. Not weak, not trembling. "Clear. Don't move," Ray said. "Tell me what happened." "I fell," she said. "The hip. I tried to catch the guardrail." She moved her eyes briefly toward the road behind them without moving her head. "Missed. How long have you been down?" She thought about it. 20 minutes. Maybe more. Ray looked back at Deb, who was already on the phone, already giving the address and the situation to the dispatcher with the calm efficiency of someone who has handled difficult moments before and knows that calm is the most useful thing you can offer them. He looked at Carol, 30 years of nursing, now retired, already kneeling on the other side of the woman with her hands doing what trained hands do automatically, whether you're in a hospital or on a gravel shoulder at 6:40 in the morning. He looked at Marcus, the youngest of the group, standing back with his hands at his sides, doing the most useful thing a person can do in an emergency, which is stay out of the way and be ready. Then he looked back at the woman on the ground. "We've got help coming," he said. "You're going to be all right." She looked at him with those direct blue-gray eyes. "I know I'm going to be all right," she said. "What I'm not sure about is my dog." Subscribe if you're new here. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. This one matters. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She was 79 years old. She had a broken hip and a cold front coming, and a dog at home named Hector, and she was, Ray would decide later, one of the most clear-eyed people he had ever met. Carol established in the first 5 minutes that Eleanor had sensation in both legs, that her pulse was strong, that her breathing was steady, and that the hip was broken but had done nothing more catastrophic than that. She relayed all of this to Eleanor as she went, in the manner of one person being honest with another rather than a professional managing a patient. Eleanor received each piece of information with a nod. "Good," she said, when Carol told her the legs were responding. "The hip I already knew about." "You knew it was broken?" Carol said. "I knew something was very wrong," Eleanor said. Broken seemed like the most likely option. Carol looked at her. "Have you broken anything before?" "My wrist." 1987, horse-related incident. She paused. The horse was fine. Ray, who had folded his jacket and placed it under Eleanor's head, caught the look on Carol's face and understood it completely. This was not a woman who was going to be difficult to help. This was a woman who was going to be very specific about what kind of help she actually needed. "Tell me about the dog," Ray said. Eleanor looked at him. She seemed to decide that he had earned the longer version. "Hector," she said. "Shepherd mix, 12 years old. Gerald, my husband, found him on the side of Route 9, actually, not far from here. Different spot. Hector was maybe 8 weeks old, sitting in the grass next to the road like he was waiting for something." She paused. Gerald always said Hector knew the right car would come along eventually. Gerald was like that, very confident about things working out. "Was he right?" Ray said. "About things working out?" Eleanor considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "More often than not," she said. It was one of his more irritating qualities. Marcus, from his position at the edge of the group, made a sound that was almost a laugh before he controlled it. Eleanor heard it. She turned her eyes toward him without moving her head. Carol had a hand at her neck. "You," she said. Marcus looked up. "Ma'am, how old are you?" 27. "You look younger." "I know," he said. "It won't last," she told him, not unkindly. "Enjoy it." Marcus blinked. "Yes, ma'am." Ray watched this exchange and thought, "She's going to be fine." The ambulance was 12 minutes out. In those 12 minutes, the group settled into the particular rhythm of people who have something to do and are doing it. Carol monitoring, Deb on the phone, the others creating a quiet perimeter that was less about blocking the road and more about making the shoulder feel like somewhere a person was meant to be, rather than somewhere a person had gone down alone. And Eleanor talked, not because she was delirious or frightened, because she was practical and there were things that needed to be said, and she had a captive audience who had sat down next to her on the gravel and seemed disinclined to leave. "My husband rode," she said to Ray. "Motorcycles, for 30 years. Ray looked at her. "What did he ride?" "I have no idea," she said. "He told me many times. I could never retain it. It was blue. That's all I can tell you." "Blue is a good color," Ray said. "He would have been very pleased to hear you say that." She paused. "He always wanted me to ride with him. I did once, early on. We went about a mile, and I decided that was enough, and got off and walked back to the house, and he never asked again." "Smart man," Deb said, from where she was standing. Eleanor looked at her. "Very," she said. "In certain ways." She paused. "He was difficult in others. He had opinions about the correct way to load a dishwasher that I found completely exhausting. We argued about it for 43 years. Who was right?" Carol said, not looking up from what she was doing. "I was," Eleanor said. He knew that too, by the end. He just couldn't admit it without some kind of ceremony, so we let it be. Ray was quiet for a moment. "When did he die?" 4 years ago, Eleanor said. "In his own bed, which is how he wanted. In the morning, which was how I found out." She said this without drama, the way she said everything, as fact delivered plainly, with the particular dignity of a woman who has decided that the truth doesn't need decoration. I still walk every morning because we used to walk every morning. It seemed like the wrong thing to stop. She looked at the gravel beside her for a moment. He would have something to say, she said, about the fact that I am currently lying on the side of Route 9 with a broken hip at 6:40 in the morning. What would he say? Ray asked. Eleanor thought about it. He would say he told me the hip needed looking at 6 months ago. She paused. He would be right. He usually was, about the things that mattered. Another pause. Don't tell Carol that. She'll use it. Carol said, without looking up. Too late. Eleanor made a sound that was almost a laugh. Then the pain caught up with it, and she went still for a moment, breathing through it with the careful discipline of someone who has decided that pain is information rather than emergency. Ray put his hand over hers on the gravel. She didn't pull away. Why were you out here? Ray said, when the moment had passed. At 6:40. Eleanor looked at him. Her expression was the expression of a woman with a perfectly good answer who is slightly irritated at having to explain it. The weather, she said. They said on the television last night that the cold front was coming in this afternoon. By 4 o'clock, maybe 3. Snow by evening. She paused. I needed to get to the lumber yard before it closed. Ray looked at the cloth shopping bag still in her hand. For firewood. For firewood, she confirmed. Carol looked up. Marcus had gone very still. You're out of firewood, Ray said slowly, and a cold front is coming this afternoon. That's correct, Eleanor said, with the patience of someone accustomed to explaining things that seem obvious to her. Ray was quiet for a moment. Ms. Marsh, you were going to walk to the lumber yard, buy firewood, and carry it 2 miles home. In a shopping bag. I was going to ask Mr. Peterson to drive it out, Eleanor said. He's done it before. He has a truck. He charges for it. But it gets there. She paused. I would have called ahead, but my telephone was not cooperating this morning. Ray looked at Deb. Deb looked at Ray. And where's your woodpile? Ray said. You said you're out. Did you run through it? Eleanor was quiet. A different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of organizing information, but the quiet of something that carries weight. I had wood, she said finally. Plenty of wood. Gerald always made sure we had wood stacked before October. He was particular about it. She paused. Craig took it. Craig, Ray said. Dale Hennessy's boy, she said. The property next to mine. He wants me to sell. He's been wanting me to sell for 2 years. His father never bothered me, but Dale passed last spring, and Craig came back from wherever he'd been and decided the land was worth something now. She said this with the particular flatness of someone who has had time to be angry about something and has arrived, on the other side of the anger, at a kind of cold clarity. He's right that it's worth something. That's the part that makes it complicated. What did he do? Ray said. Tuesday night, Eleanor said. While I was asleep, came with his truck and took the whole winter's worth. When I went out Wednesday morning, it was gone. She paused. He left a note. Said if I signed the sale papers, he'd bring it back. The overpass was very quiet. Ray looked at Deb. Marcus had stopped pretending to be at a comfortable distance. Even Carol's hands had stilled for a moment. The sheriff, Ray said. The deputy came out, Eleanor said. Looked at the empty woodpile. Looked at the note. Told me it was a civil matter. She said this without heat. Just as information. delivered in the tone of a woman who has processed the injustice of it and is now focused on what comes next. I don't have a lawyer. Gerald handled that kind of thing. He was better with confrontation than I am. A pause. So I decided to handle it myself. Get wood. Get through the winter. Figure out the rest when the weather allowed. She looked at the empty shopping bag in her hand. She looked at the road toward Denton. Then she looked at Ray. I don't suppose, she said, that any of you have a truck. Marcus had a truck. At my place in Denton, he said. 20 minutes. Nobody responded because no response was required. The ambulance arrived at 7:03. The paramedics were good, efficient in the way of people who have done this many times and understand that efficiency is its own form of kindness. Carol briefed them in the precise language of 30 years of nursing. And they received it the way professionals receive good information from other professionals, which is gratefully and without wasting time. Eleanor was cooperative with all of it. She answered every question, described her pain accurately, and submitted to being moved to the stretcher with only one moment of resistance, which was when a paramedic reached for the shopping bag. I'll take it, Ray said. Eleanor looked at him. Then she released the bag. As they were loading her, she turned her head to look at Ray. Her face from the stretcher was the face of someone who had registered everything and was now filing it correctly. Hector, she said. He doesn't know strangers well. He'll bark. We'll manage, Ray said. He likes calm voices, she said. And he likes to be talked to like he understands what you're saying. Because he does. I'll keep that in mind. Eleanor looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, Craig Hennessy. 2nd Road past the water tower on Route 9 East. The Hennessy farm sign is still up even though Dale's gone. She said it the way you give someone an address when you trust them to go there. Not a request. A transfer of information to someone she had decided could use it correctly. Ray nodded once. Eleanor nodded once. The ambulance doors closed. They split without discussing it. Deb and Carol followed the ambulance because someone needed to be with Eleanor when Patricia arrived. Eleanor had given them Patricia's number from memory, and Deb had already called ahead, already done the careful work of delivering news in a way that didn't make it worse than it was. Ray, Marcus, and the other 5 had a different direction. Marcus went for his truck. The others called ahead to Peterson's lumber yard, which was open by 7:30. Ray explained the situation briefly. The man on the phone, Peterson himself, Eleanor had described him right. He had a truck and a particular sense of fair play, listened without interrupting, and then said, I know Eleanor Marsh. Load what she needs. We'll sort out the money later. By 8 o'clock, Marcus's truck had a full load of split oak in the bed. By 8:15, they were pulling onto Eleanor's property. The house was a white farmhouse set back from the road, with a porch that ran the full length of the front and a garden that had been well tended and was resting under the gray November sky. The woodpile area beside the barn was a concrete platform with a roof, empty, swept clean, the groove in the concrete where wood had been stacked for 40 years now, holding nothing but cold air. From inside the house, a dog was barking. They unloaded the truck without talking. Split oak, stacked properly, the way wood should be stacked if it's going to burn right, tight enough to be stable, loose enough for air to move through. It took 25 minutes. When they were done, the platform was full. Ray stood back and looked at it. He looked at the empty Hennessy farm sign visible half a mile down the road. He looked at the others. They were already looking at him. Craig Hennessy was in his yard when 8 motorcycles turned off Route 9 onto his property road. He was 34 years old, back in Dolan less than a year, and had returned with the particular confidence of a man who'd been gone long enough to forget what small towns remember about you. He'd looked at his father's land and Eleanor Marsh's land beside it and done arithmetic that seemed simple from the outside. Old woman. Bad hip. Alone. No family close by. A woodpile removed in the night. A note left on a kitchen table. The quiet, calculated pressure of someone who believed that time and inconvenience would do the work that outright confrontation couldn't. He had been wrong about several things. He heard the engines first, not one engine, not two, but a sound that multiplied and didn't stop multiplying until 8 motorcycles had turned off the road and were coming up his property lane in single file, unhurried, at the deliberate pace of people with nowhere particular to be and no reason to rush. They pulled up in a row in front of his yard and stopped, 8 engines cutting at exactly the same moment. The silence that followed was the specific silence of 8 engines going quiet simultaneously, which is a different kind of silence than one engine or no engine. It has a weight to it, a texture. Craig stood in his yard and watched Ray Cortez get off his bike. Ray didn't move quickly. He didn't move aggressively. He walked to where Craig was standing at a pace that suggested nothing in particular, stopped at a distance that was not threatening and was not comfortable, and looked at Craig Hennessy with the expression of a man who has already decided how something ends and is simply waiting for the other person to reach the same conclusion. Behind Ray, the 7 others sat on their bikes. Not moving, not speaking, not performing anything, just present, the absolute and unhurried presence of 7 people who have sat down next to a problem and intend to wait with it. Craig said, "This is private property." His voice came out smaller than he'd intended. Ray said, "Eleanor Marsh is at Denton General with a broken hip." He said it the way you state a fact about weather. Flat, clear, no performance attached. She was on her way to the lumber yard at 6:40 this morning to buy firewood, because her woodpile was empty. Craig said nothing. "It's not empty anymore," Ray said. "We took care of that." Still nothing from Craig. His eyes moved briefly to the bikes behind Ray. 7 people, 7 machines, all facing him, none of them blinking in any particular hurry. "The note you left her," Ray said. "That's not how this works." Craig opened his mouth. He looked at Ray's face. He looked at the 7 behind him. He looked at the road that led back to Route 9 toward Eleanor's house, toward the full woodpile that had been empty this morning when Eleanor left in the dark to walk 2 miles to a lumber yard with a cloth shopping bag and a bad hip. He closed his mouth. Ray waited. He was good at waiting. Craig Hennessy was not, as it turned out, as certain about his calculations as he had believed. The arithmetic had seemed simple from the outside. It was less simple with 8 motorcycles in your yard and a man looking at you with the particular patience of someone who has been on the road long enough to know the difference between problems that resolve themselves and problems that require attention. "The land," Craig started, "is hers," Ray said, "until she decides otherwise. If she decides otherwise." He paused. "That's her decision, not yours." He let that sit for a moment. Then he said, in the same flat, clear tone, the deputy said it was a civil matter. "Maybe it is. But there are other people who take an interest in the situation now." He looked at Craig steadily. "You understand what I'm saying?" Craig understood what he was saying. He didn't speak again. Ray got back on his bike. The 8 of them rode back to Eleanor's house. Ray sat on the porch steps and talked to Hector through the door, low and easy, the way Eleanor had said, like the dog understood what you were saying. Because he did. By the time Patricia arrived, Hector had his gray muzzle pressed against the bottom of the door, tail moving. Ray left the note on the porch, in Carol's handwriting, "Your wood is stacked. Hector is fine. Patricia is coming." The riders. They were gone before Patricia's car turned onto the property road. That was how they did things. The cold front came in at 2:30. By 4, snow was falling on Denton, the first real snow of the season, the kind that settles in and means it. By evening, the temperature had dropped 15 degrees from the morning. Eleanor's house was warm. Hector slept at the foot of her hospital bed when Patricia brought him in. The hospital had views about this, but Patricia had stronger views, and Eleanor had the particular kind of quiet authority that tends to resolve institutional disagreements without raising anyone's voice. Eleanor healed ahead of schedule, because Eleanor did most things ahead of schedule when she decided to. She was home in 11 days. The letter from Craig Hennessy's lawyer arrived 3 weeks after that. It acknowledged that the removal of the wood had been unlawful. It used the words restitution and will not recur. It did not use the word apology, which Eleanor found she didn't need. The other words were more useful. She had already decided she was not selling. The package arrived at Ray's house in Denton in late April. Brown paper, tied with actual string, the kind of wrapping that announces itself as deliberate, that says someone wrapped this the way packages should be wrapped, and that was that. Inside was a card in clear, formal cursive and something wrapped in cloth. The card said, "Ray Cortez, the hip is healed. The house is still mine, which is where I intend it to stay. Patricia comes on Sundays. Hector is 12.5 and insufferably pleased with himself, which the vet says is a good sign. Gerald always said the soil in our garden would grow tomatoes if you were patient enough with it. Everyone told him Kansas soil was wrong for tomatoes. He kept at it anyway. I planted them last month. He was right. He usually was, about the things that mattered. You sat down next to me on the gravel. Most people, when they stop, stand over you. You sat down. Gerald used to do that, sit down next to whatever the problem was, and wait with it. I noticed. I am sending you something from the first thing the garden gave this year. I grew it myself. The tomatoes aren't ready yet. When they are, I'll send some of those too." Eleanor Marsh Ray unwrapped the cloth. 6 dried lavender stems tied with kitchen twine, and a folded note, smaller than the card. In Eleanor's handwriting, he had a blue one. I still don't know what kind, but I think he would have liked yours. Ray set everything on his kitchen table and looked at it for a while. Then he went to his jacket, the one that had been folded under Eleanor Marsh's head on a gravel shoulder at 6:40 in the morning, and he put it on. He rode that afternoon. The Kansas road was flat and long, and the spring light was doing what it does out there, arriving sideways, gold, turning everything it touched into something worth looking at. He thought about Eleanor in her garden, patient with the soil that everyone said was wrong for tomatoes. He thought about Hector at the foot of her bed. He thought about a woodpile that had been empty and wasn't anymore. He thought about 8 motorcycles in a row on a property road, engines quiet, nobody moving, nobody needing to say much of anything at all. Most people don't stop. But when you do, when you sit down next to whatever the problem is and wait with it, sometimes the problem turns out to be smaller than it looked from the road. Sometimes it just needed someone to stop and see it clearly. And sometimes, in late spring, you get lavender and a promise of tomatoes from a woman who decided her garden was worth staying for. That was the whole story. That was everything.